All right, good afternoon. Liberty North, AP Dual Credit Psychology. This is the live stream for 6th period. Hope you're having a good virtual Wednesday, November 4th. So today we're going to talk about the important structures of the brain that relate to psychology, which are in your textbook, and then also just the differences between the male and female brain. Once we kind of have a context on the important structures to psychology, okay? So I'm going to be going over pages 96 to 118 in your book. There's also 2 docs on your Canvas. So if you go to Canvas, go to Unit 3 module, you have the brain notes doc and you have the male and female brain doc. Okay, so if I go too fast, if you can't see, both docs are on Canvas. And then, of course, you have the book, which you can reference. All right, so let's get started. All right, so again, I have organized the notes for the brain structures to parallel and correlate with what's in the book. All right, so I'm going to go in order of the book, and then I've also got your brain structures organized into 3 main areas of the brain, which are the brainstem, limbic system, and cerebral cortex and cerebral hemispheres. And that's exactly what the book does. So there are many different ways to cover the brain. There are different ways to organize it. I'm just doing exactly what the book does, simply because students have said that's the easiest for them to understand so that they can follow along in the book, right, with the different brain structures that you have to have and know in the class, okay? So again, add these to your brain structure section of your AP notebook. So, and then if you actually have them already in your vocab, just make sure you develop a key so that you can find them fast during the quizzes, okay? All right. Okay, so the first area is called the brainstem, okay? And I will be using my little model brain here as we go throughout, okay? All right, so the brainstem is the oldest and innermost region of the brain, and it begins where the spinal cord, right here, enters the skull or the base of the brain, okay? So this actually is my brainstem right here, okay? All right, from the side. Right, and basically this is the hindbrain, and then it also includes the midbrain, which is right here, okay? All right, so important structures going from bottom to top. This is my medulla, or if you like the water boy, it's medulla amygdala, okay? All right, and what the medulla does is it basically runs our autonomic nervous system for us. So all of the involuntary actions that I have are controlled by the medulla. Okay, so it controls heartbeat, breathing, and most of my autonomic nervous system functions. So all that involuntary stuff, it helps keep me alive. Okay, so obviously that's a big structure if ever a coma or a vegetative state occurs. Okay, there's damage there. This is incorporated in that. Then you have the Pons, which is right here. Okay, which deals with sleep, which we'll talk about in states of consciousness next unit, and movement. Okay, and then again, if I pull this off, almost like right at the top here is my midbrain. All right, and that is my reticular formation or reticular activating system. All right, which basically is the gateway for input, sensory input and information that's coming up the spinal cord to enter the brain. So if the reticular formation doesn't deem that it's important enough, strong enough as a stimuli, then it won't send it on into the brain. Okay, so it's kind of, it deals with arousal, our sense of smell, and it relays anything that's strong enough or powerful enough of a stimulus to go into the brain. Okay, and then lastly, at the very back here, we have our cerebellum, okay, which literally means little brain, because it looks like we have 2 brains here. Okay, the cerebellum sits right there on the back of the brain, and kind of right behind also the brainstem. Right, this controls voluntary movement, balance, learning, memory, and some emotions. But what it's really famous for is that sense of balance and somatic side of our nervous system, those voluntary movements that we have. Okay, now if you notice where it sits, generally if we have a concussion, okay, concussion is when a soft tissue organ hits the base of the skull, which is very hard. But it's not only where it hits, but the brain will snap. You kind of have this whiplash effect. So if you notice, whether the brain goes forward, side, or back, it's hitting, it's kind of squishing, if you will, the cerebellum, which is why, one immediate sign of a concussion is that they're wobbly, they can't They don't have their sense of balance. They don't have voluntary movement, because this, unfortunately, because of where it sits, it generally gets kind of brunt of the impact there. Okay. All right. So that's your brainstem area, which includes the hindbrain and midbrain areas. Okay. Which again, your four structures are medulla, pons, reticular activating system or reticular formation, and cerebellum. Okay. Okay, and hold on, I'm going to move my dock up here. All right, so the next area is the limbic system. Okay, limbic literally means border. Okay, and if I were to take my brain and pull it apart here, okay, basically limbic means that it borders the brainstem and midbrain and the cerebral cortex, okay, and the cerebral hemispheres. The cortex actually is the layer on the outside. Okay, so this right here is my limbic system, okay? And generally, if you were to dissect the brain and point right to the middle of it, you're probably going to hit the limbic system, okay? All right, now in the limbic system here, there are four very important structures to psychology, okay? So right here in the middle of the brain. All right, we have the thalamus, which is the relay station for all my sensory input. So again, we talked about the reticular formation. If the reticular formation views that it's strong enough and important enough of a stimuli to be admitted into the brain, it goes immediately to the thalamus, which sits right on top of it. The thalamus then relays it to wherever it needs to go, okay? All right? So it's generally referred to as a relay station, okay? We have the amygdala, which we have talked about, which plays a huge part in anxiety and stress, but it is kind of our emotional center. So it controls aggression, fear, sadness, intense emotional responses. It also deals with emotional memory. So if you ever have a memory in which you kind of still feel it or experience it, okay, like you were kind of there, that's the amygdala. We have the hypothalamus, which I have starred, which is a huge brain structure to psychology. We've already discussed that. It is involved in motivation, body maintenance, pleasurable feelings. So it works in that dopamine track, which we've talked about. It also controls the endocrine system, which we've talked about. So it works with the pituitary gland to produce and distribute hormones throughout our body. And it controls homeostasis, which is that body equilibrium. Okay. All right. And when we get to states of consciousness, we'll refer to the hypothalamus. Okay. It's a very huge structure for psychology. Very important. All right. Then we have the hippocampus, which is memory. It's kind of now it's not the only structure that does memory, but it's kind of our memory control center, if you will, and it kind of controls, it's kind of the main hub for memory, okay? And again, those are all right here in the limbic, the border between the midbrain and brainstem, okay, and my cerebral cortexes. And that includes this right here, which we'll talk about next, which is my corpus callosum, okay? All right? Okay, I'm gonna adjust the dock here again. Okay. All right. So here we have the third part, which is the cerebral cortex and cerebrum. All right. Now this is 80% of the brain's weight. It also contains 20+ billion neurons. Okay. And that is going to be this part here. So the part that you think of as a brain is kind of this top covering, this top layer. Okay. The cerebrum is this part, and the cerebral cortex is just the very thin top layer. So again, most of you, if I were to say picture a brain in your mind, you're going to picture the cerebrum and the cerebral cortex, okay, which is this top layer, top part here, okay? So again, this would sit right on top of, okay? All right, now the first structure that I have is, again, the corpus callosum, which is this band of fibers right here, okay? Right in the kind of upper, so it sits right on top of the limbic system. And this is the structure that actually connects my two hemispheres together, okay? So I technically, if I had a brain, I could pull it apart here and just far enough to where it would expose the corpus callosum there in the middle, which connects the two hemispheres together and allows the two hemispheres to communicate back and forth, okay? All right. Number 2 is the frontal lobe, which I do have an asterisk by because it's huge in psychology. That's the yellow part here in the front of the brain. So that's the frontal lobe there, okay? which does planning, judgment, personality, moral reasoning. I have the parietal lobe immediately behind that, okay, which is involved in the sense of touch and spatial reasoning. So when we've been doing our Mozart effect studies, if you do the Rubik's Cube, the tangos, you're going to use your parietal lobe there. We have the occipital lobe, which is in the very back, which is my main visual center, and the temporal lobe, which are right above my ears on the left and right side, okay, in this green area here. These control hearing, obviously, facial recognition, awareness, and also memory. These are very important structures in memory, okay? Now, on the top, again, you have the cerebral cortex, which is that top layer of the cerebrum. And on that, you have several important structures. So moving from forward to back, you have this little thin strip here, which is your motor cortex, which controls body movement, specifically left hemisphere to right side, right hemisphere to right side. So that bilateralness is controlled by the motor cortex, all right, and any type of body movement. You have the blue layer, which is your somatosensory cortex, okay, which again controls my sense of touch, body sensations, and body position. So again, if you're an athlete and you need to know, your body position to keep balance and activity skills or athletic skills, that's what's going to be there. And then we have association areas, which are actually all throughout the cerebral cortex. So they're spread out all over the 4 lobes. And what they are is parts that actually help me perform my higher mental functions of thinking and learning. So a lot of my cognitive processes are in my association areas. There's one right behind the frontal lobe that works with the frontal lobe, okay? And they're kind of spread throughout all 4 lobes throughout the brain, okay? All right? Okay, so there we have all those of the cerebral cortex and the cerebrum. So that's your biggest part, okay, because it includes all your lobes and all your cortexes, okay? All right, let me adjust the doc one last time. We'll summarize the ending of it here. Okay, all right, so most people divide the brain into 3 regions, okay? And what you have is, and then what I've done is I put the 3 areas that psychology and your textbook emphasizes into each one. The forebrain is my cerebral cortex and my cerebrum and my limbic system. So it's this whole top part of the brain here, okay? So this would be the forebrain. The midbrain is right here in the middle, okay? Just that little structure there on the top of the brain stem as well, okay? And then I have my hindbrain, which is my brain stem and my cerebellum. Okay, right? Okay, all right. So now we kind of have a background or a context on the brain. Let's look at the structural difference between the male and the female brain, because they are drastically different. And again, if I actually had a real brain, I had a real male and female brain up here, you would immediately know that they're different. Okay, all right. So if I held one in each hand, you would know that they're different. First of all, the male brain is bigger. All right, it is larger in size. It's also larger in weight, so it has more mass. It averages about 3 pounds, okay? I think the first thing you would notice actually is, and especially if we dissect it, is that the males have a bigger or a larger amygdala, which is that emotional center there that controls extreme emotions, aggression, fear, sadness, anger, so on and so forth, okay? Overall, if we then did an fMRI on the male brain, we would see that their neurons fire at a little bit lower rate. Now, again, it's still extremely fast. It just has an overall kind of rhythm that's a little bit slower. They also have some more development in the midbrain area and in that limbic system area that controls our autonomic nervous system functions, specifically fight or flight, which is sympathetic. So we have a little bit more development there. Our sympathetic nervous system is a little bit stronger, a little bit more sensitive. We like the left hemisphere of the brain. Again, we use all of our brain all of the time, okay? But the males do like accessing the left hemisphere, okay? We have less serotonin, which is the positive calming neurotransmitter. We have more levels of testosterone in our endocrine system, which is controlled by the hypothalamus again. If you look at the right hemisphere of our brain, it looks like we're very programmed for spatial reasoning. We are visually dominant. So again, actually vision is the dominant sense for all of us, male and females, but the males take it to another level. And if you looked at the brain overall, you would say it's probably better equipped for math and science, okay? Okay, going to adjust my dock here. Okay. All right, and then we have the female brain, okay, which is smaller. It's smaller in size and mass, and it weighs about 2.7 pounds on average, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is when you're talking about an organ. First thing you would notice if we dissected the female brain is that it has a 25% larger corpus callosum. So again, that band of fibers that connects the two hemispheres together is much bigger in the female brain. And immediately there, you're going to know that the brain is set up to transfer and communicate information between the two hemispheres faster and more efficiently, which is kind of what this says, right? And that they have greater activity and development generally in the lobes, the 4 lobes of the cerebrum. They overall have a faster rate of neural firing. The female brain is considered more flexible and placid, or has more plasticity, which basically means the brain rewires itself. So again, the brain is not very good at healing itself. What it does is it rewires or it moves stuff if it's damaged. So in theory, the female brain will heal or will recover faster and better. Decreased levels of the stress hormone cortisol, much better equipped for process sensory information except for vision. That's the male brain. But the females have better senses of smell, hearing, taste, touch, right? And if you looked at it overall, you'd say the female brain was better equipped for reading and writing. All right, now the big question is, are these differences nature or are they nurture? Are they there biologically from the beginning and structurally the brain is just biologically different, or does the brain develop different because males and females live in different environments? Okay, so Rutgers University has done a study on this, and this study has been replicated and done at other research institutions. What they do is they take male and female children ages 3 to 9 months. Again, voluntary participation, as we learned in Unit 3. Their parents are allowed in the study as well. And what they do is they bring the children in, and they, whatever they're seated in, their car carrier, their car seat, their baby seat, they basically just sit them down on the floor and they sit in front of this large screen. Okay. Now the screen is showing pictures of people's faces, right? Close-ups in which they're all smiling or laughing. Okay. So they're all positive pictures. I actually think there's some dogs in there as well. Absolutely no cats. Okay. So they're all positive pictures that the baby will come in contact with. Now, what they also then is they have a string that hangs down and rests right on the infant's belly. Anytime the string moves, the pictures change. So they spend about anywhere from probably 2 weeks to a month conditioning and training the baby that if they can move that string, it'll change the picture. Now, again, babies can grasp as a reflex, but overall, 3 to 9 months, they're still working on their motor abilities. So they might not have good coordination of their arms and their legs yet, but as long as they hit the string, and just move it in any way with their stomach, their head, their arm, their knee or whatever, it'll change the picture. Now, what they do is that once the baby has learned that the string moves the picture, they disconnect the string. So what they're trying to do is basically get the infant or the baby safely and ethically in a state of frustration. Okay. And then what they want to do is see how do they respond to that emotionally? Is it the same way that they would respond when they're older? Can we see the same differences in older males and females, so on and so forth? Okay. Or is it learned? Now, generally, anything that occurs 3 to 9 months, we're probably going to lean towards nature because there hasn't been enough nurture impact. Okay. All right. But as we could probably guess, the female babies will just give up on the string and they'll start to cry. The male babies will get very angry and very frustrated and still never give up on the string. So they'll still keep trying to move the string, even though it's apparent that it's not going to work, okay? Now, I think that we would all agree that we can still see those same responses in males and females today, and that it's a difference that's there, okay? So this study and the other studies like it seem to point to that nature side of the coin, which is that at an early age or when we're born, the male and female brains are just different, okay? They're just biologically different. Now, again, there are still nurture influences, but what they're saying is that it has high heritability, right? High heritability factor in the differences of the brain, okay? All right? All right, so again, you have, if I went too fast, you have access to both docs on Canvas. So both docs of notes are there. Also pages 96 to 118 in your book, all right? Make sure, again, you're working on your AP notebook. Do your define and apply assignment. Again, I've moved everything over in Canvas based on student input to the modules. So just go to Unit 3 module and it'll lay out everything that you need to do, which again is not that much, okay? But just make sure you're keeping up. If you have any questions or need anything, just make sure you email me or chat me, and have a good virtual Wednesday. I'll see you Thursday or Friday.